Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, the happy couple. We've been at a wedding, and today we're gonna still be at that wedding. Hopefully, we're gonna make it into the reception, maybe get a piece of that tasty cake, but we're gonna do it after we come back from a song. Hi, Keith. Hi, Gunn. Thank you so much for coming. We can see some horses on screen, and Elvis around this time of his life, May 1st, 1967. He'd bought a lot of people, a lot of horses. But two of his friends, he didn't buy horses because they didn't ride horses. But he bought them cars instead. And that's what this song is about. Trust in Motion.
Radio static, Memphis bound, WABQ homes a sacred sound. Green, green grass, again and again. A DJ's risk for a loyal friend. Elvis smiles, no words exchanged, just a test of love on a range. Keys in the dark, showroom glow, a Cadillac waits in a silent show. Merry Christmas, GK said, a yellow chariot, tears unshed. What's fame and fortune worth, my friend, if it's not something we can lend? The Chevy Impala, still shining new, passed from blind to the Circle G crew. Gary Pepper wheels instead of race, rode the road with Elvis in his face. Sterling drove it, errands and guard, a father's devotion, quiet and hard. He couldn't walk, but he moved the crowd. Fancy and twisted, but faintness allowed. No colors filtered, no machine spin, just carries truth from deep within. A house still burning, a pen like flame, a heart that never saw a flame. Keys in the dark, guess that road from Cadillac dreams to a humble home. Elvis gave born and chrome and steel. He gave his friends a way to feel. What's fame and fortune, what can you see if it's not shedding loyalty?
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today we're going to hear the echoes of the happy couple. Hi, Marion. Hi, Chillin. Hi, Gunn. Hi, Keith. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate seeing you here. Keith has said that Marty Lacker, he's holding some grudges against probably the Colonel. And he also said that Marty had discovered a singer in the 70s named Rita Coolidge And then Marty was holding some grudges towards Priscilla. So it's interesting because we're first going to hear from Marty today. But Marty did do some amazing things in the music industry, and so did a lot of the other guys, like Sonny West and Lamar Fike, Jerry Schilling, Joe Esposito. They all went on to have careers in the music entertainment industry. And they are connected to some big names. Nothing as big as Elvis, but what name is as big as Elvis? So we've been at this wedding, and we saw the ceremony yesterday. Elvis and Priscilla got married. And now we're going to take a short trip back in time. Back to March 11th or 12th, 1967. Elvis fell and hit his head on March the 9th. Had a concussion. He was recovering from the concussion in his bed when they held a series of meetings. And one meeting was between Elvis and the Colonel. And the next meeting was between Elvis and the Colonel and Joe Esposito. And then they brought in Marty. And they told Marty he was getting demoted. Marty already kind of knew it was coming. There'd been a letter involved. But Marty's getting demoted. He was put in charge of special projects. And here's what Marty says he was thinking at that moment in time. Marty says, "I thought it was a joke because the Colonel and Joe had already planned the wedding." Hi, Colleen. Thank you for being here. Appreciate seeing you. Colleen says that she's not getting notifications. That's probably true. YouTube has notified me, or not so much notified me as this is what they put in their rules. If I post more than twice per day, more than once per day, if I post 2 videos or more in a 24-hour period, then they may not notify anybody about any videos because I am overwhelming the system. Now, it makes absolutely no sense to me. So I know that some of you are also watching channels where they're putting out 4 or 5 lives or videos per day. Sometimes you get notifications about some of those, but you don't get them about all of them, even if you got the all turned on. So the best thing to know is that I'm on every day, most days, at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. What I call Eastern Standard Time, but I'm an old man. So other people call it like EDT, which I think is Eastern Daylight Time or something like that. But it's the eastern part of the United States. 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. But make sure that you're still subscribed. And while you're subscribing, make sure you hit that like button for today's video. So Marty's in charge of special projects. He's in charge of the wedding, but he thinks it's a joke. Which I think kind of tells us he may not have been in on any of the planning of this, because he says it was Colonel and Joe. But then again, there were guys that were not allowed into the room where Elvis was getting married. And therefore, Marty did not want to take any blame for that. And so, of course, all these stories are told later. And Marty's indicating he wasn't in charge of any of that. He didn't make any of those decisions. And he is not to blame for the guys that were or were not in the room. And Colleen says that she just looked in YouTube and shut off the notifications on her. Well, that's the other thing they do. I feel like I'm fighting a lot of forces that don't want us to get these stories out, but I'm still getting them out twice a day. So we'll be here, and if you miss it, make sure you watch the replay. And Charlie Hodge, well, he's got something to tell us now. And I know that we all like Charlie. And he says that apparently after Jerry Schilling got married to Sandy, which was 3 or 4 days after the meeting where Marty gets demoted. So Jerry and Sandy get married on March 15th, just a few days later into that week. And Elvis, of course, pays for the whole thing for them and Joe and Joni Esposito to basically have a few days on the town of Las Vegas. Well, when Jerry gets back, that's when Elvis decides, I'm setting the date for this wedding. So when Joe tells us the story that Elvis called the Colonel and said, Priscilla and I want to get married, set it up, Joe's indicating that that happened now. Charlie's saying, this is the timeline. It was right after. Well, maybe not Charlie. This is kind of more Peter Goralnik. He's got the timeline looking like after Jerry came back from the wedding, that's what fired up Elvis to go ahead and set the date. And of course, they were at that point getting ready to restart the filming on Clambake, and then Clambake would be over on the 27th of April, which really makes May 1st like almost the soonest date Elvis could possibly have gotten married if he made the decision to pull that trigger shortly after March 15th. So it does all kind of seem to fit. And Charlie gets pulled in because he has to begin driving the Colonel back and forth from Las Vegas to Palm Springs and to Hollywood. Suddenly the Colonel's moving back and forth between these places a lot. And he's doing that to set up the wedding. So I'm not sure why the Colonel has to physically travel to these places. But apparently he does. And it's not just once, it's like more than once, according to Charlie. Hi, Pat. Thank you for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Charlie says that they're in the car and they're doing this driving, and the Colonel, well, he starts talking to him. And Colonel Parker said, now this is according to Charlie, says, now, Charlie, when you finally decide to get married, let me handle it. Not yet, Colonel, I said. I'm still practicing. When you do decide, let me know. Charlie, we could make some money on it. Make money, I said, on my own wedding? Yes, we can. Now you listen to the old Colonel. I'll rent a football stadium, and you and your bride will ride into the altar located on the 50-yard line on a pair of big elephants. We'll charge admission for it. I laughed. Colonel, that's wild. He waved the cigar at me like a magic wand. It's not wild. There's money in it. Now you listen to the old Colonel. So while Charlie's driving the Colonel around to get this wedding set up, Colonel's thinking about doing some more weddings. And he's got this idea for these elephants. This makes, to me, it gives this story the seal of authenticity that Charlie includes this detail about the elephants. Because the Colonel was wild about elephants. The Colonel loved elephants. And he collected all kinds of elephant stuff. So this is a Colonel thing. And so to drop this into the story as just a detail that's there, that sounds like the Colonel having people ride into something on a pair of big elephants. That's something he would have said. And Keith says, I bet Hodges took a fit on driving the Colonel around. Charlie said he loved driving the Colonel around. He said that the Colonel was a hilarious guy and that they had a lot of fun together. And the Colonel would take him gambling. And he would pay for Charlie to gamble. Okay, so they would go into these casinos. And Charlie said that Colonel loved to gamble. Now, he doesn't say anything about the Colonel losing any money. What Charlie remembers is that the Colonel paid for all of Charlie's gambling and that Charlie also loved to gamble. So while they were there in Vegas, they would stop at the casinos. They'd sit at the roulette tables because Colonel's game was roulette. He loved roulette. And the Colonel would say, "Here, Charlie, let me put $25 down on this number for you." And Charlie says he'd watch the Colonel put down multiple $25 chips on multiple numbers. And then when one of the numbers hit, I don't know if you guys have ever played roulette. I've played roulette, and this is a fairly common roulette strategy. You pick out 4 or 5 numbers, and you bet like $5 a piece on them. In this case, it's 25, and it pays off. I think it's 20-1. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a very large number. Maybe it's 4-1. It's like 32-1 if you get the number. But if you are like on the lines and different stuff, it lowers it. And if you're picking the colors, it again lowers it. Charlie was indicating that every time it hit a number, he'd win $200. And the Colonel just let him keep it. So it didn't matter how much was lost at the table. Charlie walked away with $200 almost every time the roulette wheel went around. A lot of times that it did. And so he's got a fairly sizable little sum of money, which probably tickles him pink because he's made this in addition to whatever he's making working for Elvis anyway. And I'm sure he's not telling any of the guys, "Hey, I made this money with the Colonel," because we already know what happens when you tell the guys that. Well, then you got to put it all in a pool. And then you split it out at the end of the month. So you don't wave this around in anybody's face. But the Colonel tells Charlie, when he's got this nice little pile in front of him, he tells him, "Hey, you go on over to that set of payphones over there." So this is back in the day when nobody had a cell phone. And there would have been a bank of payphones on the wall. Possibly even booths that you would get into with a door you could pull closed and talk on the phone. And Colonel would tell him, "Go over to that payphone, call Mrs. Parker, who is Marie, Colonel's wife, and tell her thank you. Or go over there and order some flowers to be sent to Mrs. Parker." And he goes, "You always listen to me, Charlie. Always listen to the Colonel. When you win, you buy Mrs. Parker some flowers." So out of that money that Charlie would basically get for free, he had to send some flowers to Mrs. Parker back in Palm Springs. And Keith's saying pay-per-view weddings from the Colonel. Tom H. says Charlie was known as a bad drunk, mean guy when drunk. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the show. I don't think I've seen you here before. Now, I've heard that Charlie was a drunk, and I've heard that he sometimes got a little handsy when he was drunk, but I've never really heard that he was mean. And Keith says, I've heard stories about Hodge babysitting the Smiths boys in the trailer at Graceland. I've heard Danny tell those stories as well. And Marion says flowers. Well, that's nice. So yeah, whatever they were doing, Colonel remembered his wife, and he had Charlie buy those flowers, which didn't cost Charlie a dime. Now, Peter Gorelnik, he says that the wedding, the actual ceremony, it actually took place. You know, we know that it's in this room that has confined space. At least that's what we've been told. Marty says there's plenty of space. And we've heard that it's the executive suite. But what Peter says is this is actually Mr. Prell's private living quarters. Milton Prell, the man who owns the hotel, who has been nice enough to get this all arranged for Elvis on short notice, who's got the press in at his hotel, as well as all these guests that are going to be in the banquet room, who's a friend of the Colonel's, who opened this casino the year before, got a lot of money tied up in this thing. Hopefully he's making some. I'm thinking he does, because the Aladdin's open for a long time. But they're in his private living quarters. So this isn't just a suite. This isn't something that, is rented out to everybody who's got enough money to stay in it. This is Milton's, like, his house. This is where he lives. So that might be a reason that perhaps Milton limited the number of people that could come in. I mean, if it was your house, your living quarters, maybe you got to 20 and you just said this was it. We can't bring anybody else in. I don't know. But it's a little detail that we didn't know before. And Tom says that Danny really liked Charlie. Yes, he did. And on screen, we can see the Aladdin Hotel. This is where Elvis got married. And we've seen this picture before, but just to reground us where we're at. This is Elvis's wedding ring. The one that some people say has been lost in a field in Circle G. And I want to thank Colleen so much at this moment, because she went out there and found me one of these videos that I was looking for. And Colleen, you are absolutely right. There's another video, because it's the other one I was thinking about. But thank you so much for this one. I watched it and found that part we were talking about. So I'm going to be doing something with that real soon. But here's this ring that Elvis got married with. Harry Levitch brought it to the wedding from Memphis. He made it. Harry Levitch custom made this ring to Elvis's specifications. It's got 8 of these diamonds that circle it, because 8 is Elvis's lucky number. 8 of these square diamonds in the middle. And then Harry Levitch, when this piece was sold at auction, he had included a letter of authenticity saying this is the one. He didn't say it was a remake, because somebody says they had it remade for Elvis, but that's not what Harry is indicating. And here's Elvis looking at Priscilla's ring. And it kind of looks like Priscilla's wearing a horseshoe ring herself. You remember we saw that Elvis also had a horseshoe ring he had bought from Harry Levitch for this wedding. But Priscilla has a ring on her other hand, and in this light, it kind of looks like a horseshoe, but that might just be the light reflecting off 3 of the sides and not the one on the bottom. Thank you so much for coming, Keith, and I look forward to your comments on the replay. Now, let's take a close look at Elvis and Priscilla in this picture, because they are in their wedding clothes. Although they're not standing, so we're not getting the best of looks at them, especially for the statement that I'm about to read. But Pat says he did look happy in this photo. And he does. He looks pretty happy. But Albert Goldman, who truly despised Elvis, and yet was the first guy who wrote an academic book about Elvis in the early 1980s. And one of his main sources was Lamar Fike. So it's really kind of like Lamar's book. It's kind of like Elvis What Happened, but instead of being Red, Sonny, and Dave that are supplying all the information, in this one, it's Lamar. But instead of being Steve Dunleavy, who just wants to get famous from Elvis, Albert Goldman wants to like bury Elvis, like he hates him. But it's a similar kind of, that's the way these books were written at that moment in time. And Marion says that her minimum numerology technique says that Elvis is a 9. And so, yes, Elvis did have an equation. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. But we were looking at a little bit of it, I think, in our earlier broadcast today about spiritual text. So if you're not watching the spiritual text broadcast, you might want to, because we're looking at things that Elvis actually wrote. But how do we get to 8 from a 9? I cannot answer at this moment. But we will come back and take a look. And Pat says, wow, how can anyone hate Elvis? Well, Albert Goldman was basically the anti-Elvis. Like, if you would imagine a man that was exactly the opposite of Elvis, that's Albert Goldman. Kind of like the bizarro Superman. You know, he's the exact opposite. And Albert says both of them look comically vulgar. Elvis had his hair piled up in a huge conch that, like that worn by such black singers as Bobby Blue Bland. His tuxedo was so short in the jacket and so jivey in the cut that it might have graced some salesman getting married in the Bronx. So I think we've looked at a couple of other photos of Elvis and Priscilla on this day, and I did not notice that his jacket was unusually short in any way, or that it looked like he might have got married in New York as a salesman. I'm not picking any of that up. I don't see that they look comically vulgar. I don't see they look comic or vulgar. And I don't really think Elvis's hair is piled on top of his head. I mean, it looks pretty good. He's got a good head of hair. I don't think it's that much more hair than Vernon has at this moment in time. But Albert, you know, he has a thing about it. Now, I believe Albert was a 3/4 bald man himself, you know, the horseshoe. He was not blessed with a great head of hair. And Marion says, oh my, what a hateful man. So why am I reading what some people might think of as trashing Elvis? Well, Albert Goldman, he was certainly one of the first Elvis trashers. One of the purposeful Elvis trashers. Now, Steve Dunleavy, he was a trasher, but it was for his own personal gain. Albert's was something far deeper, and it was something deep inside him, part of his psyche. He did not like Elvis, and he used his book to cut him down as much as he could, while at the same time, you know, Albert did write other books, and they did do fairly well, and they were about, like, rock and roll stars and stuff. But of course, none of them, I don't think, did as good as this one. I'm just guessing at this. But when you read about Albert, this is the book everybody talks about. The others are good. People comment on them, but I think he brings the same perspective to them. That it's a very, very filtered through an Albert lens, and it's not a happy lens. And Colleen says, that was horrible. I thought Elvis looked gorgeous. Yes. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is that this is the book you could have bought in the early 80s, and this is it. You would have bought this, or you could have got Elvis What Happened. You could have got Jerry Hopkins' book. And I think he did do an update in 79 to add the last few years. That would have been a nice one. You would have got a fairly decent view of Elvis from that. Could have got Marty Lacker's book. You could have got one from Larry Geller. You could have got one from Becky Yancey. Could have got one from Ed Parker. So there were some other books that were out there by the early 80s, but those were not academic books. They were memoirs. People saying, I knew Elvis and this is what I remember. Albert's trying to pull all that together to tell a cohesive story of Elvis's entire life. And so it's a fairly thick volume. It looked really nice on the shelf. They used, I didn't think it was that great a picture of Elvis, but for the time period, it was a drawing of a young Elvis, and people thought it was great. And I think it helped to sell the book a lot. But this is what you would have read. Whether you were a fan, and how would you have known Elvis? Well, you wouldn't. You would know Elvis through his works. What you'd seen in the movies and what you'd heard in the records. What you'd read in the magazines. That was it. What you'd seen in that Carpenter movie that had Kurt Russell in it, right? And then you got this Albert Goldman thing. So for a long time, this is what people, they trusted Albert. Why wouldn't you? He was an academic. He was supposed to be telling you the truth. But what he's really got in here is a lot of his own opinion, comically vulgar. I mean, that's not an academic judgment on anybody. And Gunn says Goldman's book was a scandal at the time, came unexpected to the fans. Yes, I think that's true, but I think the number of hardcore fans was very, very small compared to the number of people that knew Elvis and that were willing to buy a book like this, especially when it went into mass paper book distribution. So most people that read this, they would not have been huge Elvis fans. They would have been knowing Elvis, coming to know Elvis. This was their movie at the time, their Baz Luhrmann movie of the day. And just like people believe the Baz Luhrmann movie, which has many inaccuracies, but is a fun movie, a lot of people believe this book, although it's not a fun book. And Marion's asking if Albert was an old man when he wrote this. I don't think he was incredibly old. He was middle-aged. I think he was older than Elvis was when Elvis passed away, but I don't think he was... Yeah, I don't know, to tell you the truth, but I'm thinking he was like in his 40s or 50s. I don't think he was that old. Something I might look at and find out for you. Priscilla Presley says, we were both so nervous. I don't think either of us was aware of who was there and who was not. We hadn't slept all night long and were escorted into the room with the judge and everyone already there. So this is again referencing the fact that there's a bunch of people that have been invited to this wedding and they're not in this room. But Priscilla's saying she had no idea what was going on. She and Elvis, they were told, go to this room. They went to the room. They don't know where everybody's at. And everything starts happening. And Chillin in Canada says that she used an online numerology calculator for the names Elvis Presley and Elvis Aaron Presley and came up with 9 and 7 for various categories. For just the name Elvis, it was 9, 6, and 3. Yeah, so I think he used a special formula, one that he had kind of thought through. We'll find it. We'll look at it. You guys are obviously very interested in it. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And Gunn says she remembers that the fans thought that it was a lie, the Goldman book. Yes, the hardcore fans, they immediately knew this. They were very upset with this. And what Lamar Fike says is that he read the rushes on it, and he told Goldman that he couldn't publish this book, that he couldn't do this way, but that he had no control because he'd already accepted the money, and it was already too late. The story is like nearly identical to what Red and Sonny and Dave did. They got locked into this deal, and by the time that it got published, well, they couldn't say anything. Or they just didn't take advantage of whatever power they had to say anything. But in this case, Lamar's saying Albert wouldn't change it. And then Marion saying that she was using the birth date and not the name for the numerology. See, that's an interesting piece too. Where do you start? So we don't even know what Elvis started with. We'll find out. But let's get back to the wedding. We've got to get this man married off. Judge Zinoff met with Elvis and Priscilla prior to the ceremony. So this is the man from the Supreme Court of Nevada, and he performs the ceremony. He's also Jewish. He says, Colonel Parker brought Elvis off to the side of the room to meet me, and I chatted with him a few moments. My pre-ceremony meeting with Elvis was probably the most impressive part of the whole experience. I was simply amazed at the boy's modesty. He was low-key, handsome as a picture, very respectful, and very intense. And so nervous, he was almost bawling. Then I was taken over to meet Priscilla. She was absolutely petrified. She couldn't open her mouth. Just stood there staring at me and nodding a little when I explained things to her. So the judge notes that they are both very nervous, Priscilla and Elvis, but that he's extremely impressed with Elvis. Now, this is a man who has probably spent many years judging people for a living. I mean, I'm assuming there's a good chance he's sent people to prison for their life. But here he is, judging Elvis and finding him to be impressive in his modesty, that he was very respectful and very intense. That's a very different picture than Albert Goldman would like us to believe. But of course, Albert wasn't there, and the judge was. Priscilla Presley says, it seemed that as soon as the ceremony began, it was over. Our vows were taken. We were now husband and wife. I remember flashbulbs popping, my father's congratulations, my mother's tears of happiness. So the judge said that Priscilla was petrified, just stood there with her mouth open while he tried to speak to her. And then she's saying, as soon as it started, it was over. It all went by in a flash for Priscilla. But she does remember her father and her mother being there. And Albert Goldman, one of our favorite writers, he says, Priscilla wore the traditional white gown, veil, and train. She ruined the effect of bridal beauty and virginity by giving her face the full Cleopatra treatment with the heaviest kind of coal black eye makeup and a mane of dyed black hair that would have better suited a witch than a bride. So Albert, he says that Priscilla's face is just caked in makeup, and she has the effect of Cleopatra, which was a famous movie at the time. Not the real Cleopatra, because we don't really know what kind of makeup she was wearing. This would have been what Elizabeth Taylor was wearing in the movie Cleopatra. Now, when I look at Priscilla's face in this picture, I recognize that a lot of people, they don't have good feelings towards Priscilla. And I'm not indicating one way or the other how anyone should or should not feel about Priscilla or any action she took in the past or in the present. But in this picture, I do not see that she is wearing Cleopatra-like makeup. She appears to be very fresh-faced. May Mann, who is a reporter who's here, she even indicated that Priscilla was not wearing any makeup other than some eyeliner, some very restricted eye makeup and lip gloss. So to me, she looks to have a very fresh face, and that any beauty that you see there is her true and natural youthful beauty. And that Albert was a very mean and nasty person to have said this thing about her. And that he said that in order to take a dig at Elvis, not necessarily at Priscilla. And Elizabeth agrees that Goldwyn's was a horrible book. And Gunn says that after Goldwyn, it took a rather long time till the next book came. Well, the next book, I believe, would have been Elaine Dundee's Elvis and Gladys, which was a beautiful book. It does have errors, but Elaine did such a wonderful job with the resources that she had available, and she looked at things through a very charitable lens. And she actually met with real people who knew Elvis, especially those from Tupelo, and those are good people, right? And she recognized that they were good people, and she liked them, and they saw goodness in her, and her book that's what that book is. So it's a wonderful reflection of Elvis, but only up to the point where Gladys passes away. Of course, if you wanted to know the rest of Elvis's life, you were then had to go back to Goldman or possibly Jerry Hopkins. But if you got Goldman, you saw a very, very negative view of the second half of Elvis's life. And Tom says that fans have never liked Priscilla's dress. I don't know if I like it either, but I'm not a great judge of bridal gowns. That's not really my thing. I do know that Priscilla designed this on her own, and this would have been one of her early design experiences, I think. I'm sure she designed other clothes that she had worn prior, but this was a big one, right? Where a lot of people are going to see it. And then later she's going to go on to invest in and open a boutique where all they do is sell clothes that she and the other lady, Biss and Boo, she's Boo and the other is Biss, that they have designed. And Colleen says that Albert is harsh. Chillin in Canada says that's quite a makeup review. And Tom says that I like Priscilla, that he's met her a few times. That's not a popular opinion around a lot of these parts, Tom. But all opinions are welcome here. What we try to do is get down to the truth in the source material so that we can all walk away with our own opinions, but founded in fact. Because I think there's a lot of arguing out there about stuff that neither side actually has the truth, and they're arguing about fiction. Both sides are arguing about fiction. And Elizabeth says that was pretty harsh to say about Priscilla. And Tom says he was mean to Elvis too. That's true. And Tom says he's not an expert at wedding dresses either. And Gunn says, I don't know how many books, but Goldman is hard to forget, but she's never read it, but remembers the scandal around it. Exactly. That, Goldman affected things all the way up till today. And Marion says that she thinks the dress is okay. Yeah, I don't think it's that different from any other bridal dress that's out there or really worthy of comment. I think it's a very 60s looking wedding dress. And my mother, I know that she admired Priscilla's look at that time. Priscilla was like in all the magazines. Everybody took pictures of these wedding pictures and published them everywhere. All the girls for the next 5 years wanted to look like Priscilla when they got married. And obviously I think that has more to do with Elvis, but that's what they wanted. And my mom, she even patterned her hair at one point, I think, after Priscilla, when Priscilla was wearing it longer and straighter. And Colleen's saying that it's the 60s, the styles were very different than today. And Chillin says that in her first book, Priscilla says she purchased the dress. Huh, because I'm thinking we saw somebody earlier on a previous episode tell us that Priscilla was making the dress. So that's an interesting point. Or that Priscilla had designed the dress. I think that's the way it was stated. And Chillin says she ultimately purchased. So maybe it was Dee that was telling us that Priscilla began to design the dress as soon as she was asked to get married. And now Chillin's brought us the rest of the story. She ultimately purchased an off-the-rack white silk chiffon gown. Everybody keeps calling this organza. Is that the same as chiffon? We knew that it was probably silk organza, but with an empire waist, and I think that means it's really high, right? Like the waist is like right under the chest line, and bead embellishments from a shop called Westwood, as there was no time to have one custom made due to the rushed wedding plans. That doesn't sound like she started planning that back when she got asked, like Dee said, does it? And that she had gone out to dress shop with Charlie Hodge. I probably should have researched that more, huh? Thank you so much, Chillin. That's very interesting. Well, that's what I get for taking Dee's word. We've learned something yet again. Priscilla Presley says we should have had Red there. So Red's not here. Because he's mad, he's angry, he's somewhere else. Some people says he left the building. Other people said he's in his room. Jerry Schilling said he kicked down the door to his room. But he's not here. And Tom said, I think Billy and Joe have said they went out and bought that dress. Well, Tom, if you can find that video and throw it into the comments of this video, I would love to see that. I know they've said a lot of stuff, but going back and finding anything in those videos is very difficult. And upon completion of this wedding ceremony, the violin, the string bass, and the accordion trio, they started playing Here Comes the Bride as Elvis and Priscilla, holding hands, strode into the adjoining banquet room. So they're leaving Milton Prell's private residence, and they're receiving a standing ovation from their guests. And Marty Lacker says the ceremony was simple, but the news conference that followed was wild. The guests were escorted to the Aladdin room, where the wedding breakfast reception for 100 people was about to take place. So we know there was about 20 people, 18 to 20 people that actually saw the ceremony. We're going to get some actual numbers here and say, or a list of some of the people. But we know that there was about 18 to 20 people. That means there's another 80 people. 80 people that, in addition to this 20, are waiting to celebrate this wedding. That's a lot of people. And Gunn says that in the 60s, one could just look at Elvis's movies and see the clothes in that time and how they looked. Yeah, they are a good showpiece of the time. And they were, most of the stuff in those movies was on the cutting edge, because that's how they were drawing people into the movies. It was a youth-oriented movie culture even then. And Chillin in Canada says that when Priscilla bought this dress, She was wearing a blonde wig and sunglasses as a disguise. Or possibly Charlie Hodge was wearing a blonde wig and sunglasses. Or maybe they both were, in order to remain in disguise, in order to buy this particular gown. And Colleen says, do you think that Elvis was talking about Red not being there during that taped phone call? That's an interesting question, because the wedding is brought up and Elvis says something about how he didn't even want to be there or do that. And so that might have been him trying to heal that fracture from way back in 1967. So here he is 10 years later, making a phone call to Red saying, I know that the rupture occurred at this moment, that this was it. And, you know, it was too busy. I couldn't do anything. I didn't know it was happening. I would have changed it. You know, it's a regret. And I remember in that phone call, Red kind of just brushes it all off. Like, he doesn't even know why Elvis is bringing that up, but there's also something deeper there in his voice. So, I mean, I truly think that this is the moment when everything changes for Red and Elvis. It's never the same after this. And it's this that allows Red to psychologically participate in whatever he does later that ends up in the greater rupture of 1976. So this is festering all this time. And Chillin' in Canada saying that she agrees with Tom, that she thinks Billy and Joe did say they bought this dress. And Dee Presley says the wedding held at the Aladdin Hotel was followed by a lavish bash to which the press had been invited. On screen, we can see a replica of what it is thought, based on Priscilla's descriptions most likely, of what her wedding ring looked like. But as we've already kind of indicated, it's looking to us like this ring is out somewhere in the fields of Circle G. And Gunn says, where is Priscilla's wedding dress today? I have no idea. Good question. I did not run across it as I researched these videos, so I don't know. And Pat says that she has it. She had to get it out of Graceland. Yeah, I don't know. Did you see her say that, Pat? Is that how you know that? Or she's talked about that in an interview or something? Or are we just guessing that she took it? I would assume that she took it when they got divorced. And Marion says that she agrees. Red seemed to be extremely hurt by this wedding thing. And that this is the beginning of the end for Red and... But they must have had a very strong relationship, because it lasts for nearly 10 more years, like 9 more years. So I'm thinking like 8.5 until something terrible happens. And then Elvis lets him go. And Gunn says that she's also heard something about a fight around the wedding dress. Now here's a picture from the very end of the ceremony. The first kiss of the happy couple as man and wife. And you can see that they are a very beautiful couple. And Priscilla seems extremely happy. And Pat says that this came out when Priscilla took Riley to court after Lisa died, the fact that she has the wedding dress. Well, that's interesting. And I believe this is the couple on the way to the reception, to the Aladdin room, or what I think Billy and Joe are going to call the Blue Room, or the banquet room, as it's been called. Now, Peter Guralnick, he indicates that Milton's private quarters are not connected directly to the banquet room, that there is a pool area in between. But May Mann, who was there, she indicates it's right next to it. Now, May Mann did not go into the private area, so maybe what she thought was the private area was the pool area. And then Milton's was a door beyond that. I don't know. I think it would be unusual that his private quarters would enter directly into the banquet room, but every other description says it's connected to the banquet room. So there's another mystery for you if anybody has the Aladdin floor plan from 1967. We might be able to get to the bottom of that one. Gunn says that there was something about Graceland had stolen it from Priscilla and she wanted it back. And so I guess she was saying it was still there and she thought she should have possession. And Pat says that Priscilla had to take all of her own stuff out of Graceland. That was the agreement they did. So that stands to reason that Priscilla was probably storing some of her own stuff at Graceland. And Gunn says she got it back. Guess she changed her mind again. Maybe she sold it. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting. I'm sure at this point it's worth a lot of money, right? Like, now it would probably be worth a lot. Now I'm looking at Elvis's jacket in this picture, and I don't think it looks unusually short. I mean, it's not a long cut jacket, but I'm not looking at it saying, wow, that's really a short jacket. So I don't think Albert was very accurate in any of his descriptions. But that is all that we're going to make it through today. And so when we come back, we're going to get into the press conference and then hopefully into the reception. We've got 100 people here to feed. So we can't hold out on this too long. They're going to get hungry. And this is a buffet, so they're going to need to go up and get their own food. But before I leave, we'll go out on another song. And this song is going to be about his dreams on the Circle G, called Circle G Dreams, because he's going to be back there in less than a week. Y'all keep on taking care of business.
I drew a line in the dirt, said this land could be yours. 1 acre each, a house, a porch, a door. I saw the light in their eyes, like stars in the dust. But the paper stayed blank, and the dream gathered rust. I wasn't cash poor, I was rich in belief, trying to carve out a kingdom beneath cotton clouds and the Mississippi sun. But every time I reached, the dream came undone. Don't you forget what I tried to make, a home for the hearts I refused to forsake. They called it a whim, they called it a waste, but I saw a commune, not just empty space. Don't you forget me when the fences arise, when the ranch house fades and the silence lies. I gave you the down, I gave you the land, but the kingdom never built still lives in my hand. They said zoning laws, they said legal red tape, but I saw a chapel in every landscape, a replica of Graceland, a circle of trust, but the curl was bust, and the dream turned to dust. I signed the checks, I made the calls, watched the trailers roll in like prayer storms. But Vernon's face, tight as a gate, held back the flood of what I tried to create. Don't you forget what I tried to give, a place where my people could finally live. They called it a farm, they called it a phase, but I saw a future in the ranch's haze. Don't you forget me when the lights go out, when the house plans fade and the voices doubt. I gave you the downbeat, I gave you the land, but the kingdom never built still lives in my hand. Still lives in my hand. Still lives in my hand.